Fantastic. So, well, oh my goodness, Graham's voice changes at that point. Welcome to everyone to Le Monde, to Coffee Buddies again. And this is about the 156th one we've done since the COVID stuff started. And just as we start, somebody starts drilling in the background, but I can't help that. We've decided that we would do a bit of a series on all the different components of really building an integrated drug discovery company through the use of a lot of our outsourcing colleagues. And we're going to maneuver our way through the different parts of the chain over the next few weeks. And we started yesterday with, and one of the things I just tell you is, there's I have an incredible interest in this, because one day I was at Roche and somebody came to my door who was the head of finance for Roche and said, Tony, could you run the entire development organization with just your secretary? And that was the challenge. Could I run the whole development organization with just a secretary and outsource everything? And of course, that was the beginning of people thinking about what are these things called outsource groups. And the evolution of the clinical world was, I'm not that old, but once upon a time there were just these tiny little boutiques. Like when I was at Bart's, we had, one of the rheumatologists had their own little cottage CRO, and then we had a few beds with a bit of a phase 1 unit, and then it's grown and grown and grown. And what I think everybody's interested now is what's the evolution of this outsourcing world. And as we go through the next few weeks, we're going to be going through all the different parts, from manufacturing to regulatory to everything. So we started yesterday with preclinical, and we really ended up with a huge, interesting discussion about the nomenclature of a CRO. What is it? What do they do? How do you get customers? And there was a lot of people moaning that Mike was one of them. Lovely to see him. That there was a whole pile of people knocking at his door like mad, and how could he differentiate? And then we started talking a lot about how do you get close to customers. So that's really the subject of the meeting tonight, and I'm delighted we've got a couple of or three really interesting people to talk to us. Well, not talk to us, but talk with us. And the framework we're going to use is we're going to start the conversation for about 25 minutes, bring people in with questions, and then do some sort of breakouts into small things. And that works normally very well and is a tried and tested experience. So we'd love you all to stay with us. So I'm going to first of all introduce, firstly, Nicola. Maybe you could just say who you are, what you do, and where you are.
Thank you, Tony. Nicola Wall. I'm the CEO of Afortiori Development. So we are a full-service CRO. So I'm currently based here in the west of Ireland, in Galway. We have an Irish office and we have a UK office as well, but we're currently delivering studies over the UK and Ireland. And it's great to be able to talk about this and talk about it in a really interesting forum. So plenty to say on that later.
Fantastic. Steve, welcome to Steve up north.
Yes, hi everybody, I'm Steve McConchie. I'm the CEO of a full-service contract clinical research organisation. It's a long word, isn't it? Based in Alderley Park up in Cheshire. So pleased to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
And fantastic, thank you Steve for coming. And Panteli, our dear friend Panteli, welcome Panteli.
Yes, hi, good afternoon everyone, and appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation today. So Panteli Theocharous, I'm actually the Advanced Therapies Business Unit Lead for PPD. So we're a global CRO, and I'm based just outside London. I'm here in the UK, where we certainly have our European headquarters in Cambridge. So pre-pandemic, when we weren't traveling, Cambridge is the base from a business perspective anyway. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fabulous. And thank you so much for coming. So I'm now going to take a deep breath, and then I'm going to say, Nicola, a CRO. It's interesting why I want to take a deep breath, but there is a deep breath. Nicola, a CRO in the clinical space. Say more.
Say more.
What is it? What is it today? 2021. We're in 2021. What is it?
It's the research. It's the arm, the extension of a company that wants to obtain clinical evidence on their products. And I think it has to be as broad as that, because I think what's happening is that, you know, obviously the CRO industry is burgeoning. But I think I mean, I started this company, Afortiori means with yet stronger reason, and it was to provide better research services than what I was able to provide as part of a bigger, larger organization at the time. And it was to provide an extension to other companies, you know, so that they could conduct the research they wanted to conduct, but they didn't necessarily have the resources in-house or the expertise to be able to do that. And I say that as well because, you know, a lot of clients that we've been working with, and actually clients that have ended up having to come to us, have tried to hire expertise in-house spanning a whole range of disciplines. So they're in trying to hire one person to oversee an entire trial and expect that person to have biostatistics and data management, for example, and not being able to find that in one person has led them to our door. And I actually kind of want to throw that out there because I think it's an interesting concept in terms of, you know, how you then look to outsource research, but to maybe only outsource small parts of it and still keep some of that expertise in-house. I think a lot of companies now are facing that dilemma as well.
Excellent. Steve, the big sign then, Clinical CRO 2021. What's your statement?
Yeah, just building a little bit on what Nicola said. I think, you know, for us, it's about the science, isn't it? You know, ultimately, what we're all here to do in the room, whether or not you're working for a CRO, you're a biotech, you're pharma or whatever, it's what's the best way to get good science to patients as safely and as quickly as possible. You know, that's what we get up for in the morning, regardless of whether or not we're in the world of CRO or labeling as a CROs, or you sit on the other side of the fence, you know, as a drug developer. You know, I spent 30 years at AstraZeneca developing drugs, you know, and I think I've probably learned just as much about developing drugs, you know, being, you know, running a CRO and starting a CRO as I did, you know, being part of AstraZeneca and running early phase oncology trials for many years at AstraZeneca. So I think it's that realization of where science is going now, and really particularly for the small, you know, the university-backed VC, you know, the SME, you know, the virtual companies, you know, they have great science, okay, but they don't necessarily have the expertise and the infrastructure and the cash to actually get that great science to patients. So I think for us, that's the most important thing, is how do we actually get the best science in front of patients as quickly as we can? And that's what kind of ultimately should unite us all, isn't it? Regardless of whether or not you're, you know, a client or a CRO. It is all about partnership, like Nicola was saying, and you know, I think that's what CROs should be, and I think that's where we make the difference. And every day is different, and we love what we do.
Panteli, my friend.
I think that, you know, these are all, you know, very great, you know, great points, very relevant. I think from my perspective, it's really about, yeah, I mean, as we'd mentioned earlier, generation of evidence, bringing transformational therapies to patients. And we all want to be part of that, you know, that part of that journey. I started my career in the clinical environment, and then, you know, very similar to Steve, and I'm sure for Nicola as well, but, you know, spent more than 25 years in drug development with a focus on hematology oncology. So we do want to be driven by science. We do want to be driven by the way that we partner and really sort of understand needs and develop the necessary capabilities and expertise, as I've mentioned, to bring transformational therapies to patients. So for me, I'm always going to be looking at things through a patient's lens. But I think that there are certainly a number of key drivers that needs to be considered, moving forward and thinking about this model as it continues to evolve.
If we think of the map, what's the map of the CRO world like, Nicola, now? Is it, I mean, I'm very interested in mapping, it's a bit like you can have a map of the world and the map of UK. It's like, is the map few global centers around the world in big pharma that are contracting for international studies? Are there abundant SMEs that are there hundreds of SMEs that are doing clinical studies? Or are there tens? And where do mid-pharma sit in all of this? What's the map like of the way that CROs are interacting with their customers?
Well, I mean, it's all of the above, Tony. You still have obviously your really large organizations that need to conduct research, and they need the help of those other huge CROs to be able to conduct multi-thousand patient studies all over the world. And they're there and they serve a purpose. You have now, I think more than ever, you've got a flourishing number of SMEs that want to conduct their own research. But I think the interesting thing is that, I think as somebody alluded to earlier, there's a money issue there in terms of the adequate funding, because we know that to bring anything into the clinic it's just a costly business. We've just gone through a process as well, with sites in the UK around, the costs and how that's changed, particularly in the last year. So, these smaller companies, they're out there trying to get access to that funding so that they can do their own research, and I think the other side to that is the huge growth now in the medical device sector, especially in terms of their need for clinical evidence now. Having gone through the process of, the new regulations coming into full force, the requirements for clinical evidence from that entire, I suppose, ecosystem that, in some, you'd argue that maybe it was there before, but actually it really wasn't, not to the extent that it will be. And I think you're going to see huge growth in, the need to run clinical studies for these companies, and also post-market surveillance types of studies. So, I think there's all sorts out there, absolutely, and I think there's room for so many great providers in the market, like what the cross section up here today.
I mean, is there a big roll-up strategy that's going on? So people are hoovering up smaller CROs and aggregating it. Steve, what's your thoughts about the map?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Nicola. I think, it's a bit like saying shipbuilding, isn't it? Boats, and when you talk about boats and boat builders, there are companies that, are super tankers, you need super tankers, container ships, all the rest of it that need to be built. There are companies that build, super tankers extremely well. Okay, equally well, there are speedboats or even rowing boats potentially. The important thing is you don't ask a company that's expert in developing super tankers to actually build you a speedboat, and vice versa. So I think it's really, the market is kind of so niche in a lot of ways, but it's all about relationships at the end of the day, isn't it? It's about the trust that you build, and obviously, a speedboat could eventually become a super tanker. So it's about those relationships, isn't it? And that's why there is so much consolidation within the industry. Everyone knows and understands that it's about relationships, it's about reputation, and really a lot of companies, and certainly one of our strategies is to try and grow with our clients, to actually, we win when they win. And I think, for some of the larger organizations, maybe they don't want to be perceived as super tankers. They want to be perceived as, high-end, speedboat builders. So again, I think there's a lot of consolidation in the industry, but it's all about relationships. And I think, it's an interesting time, and so yeah, it's just a very interesting time at which to be in the industry, because I think it's completely changing, you know. And to Nicola's point about digital, you know, and wearables, you know, start thinking about AI and wearables and digital biomarkers, and, you know, and real world evidence, generation of real world evidence as well. It's completely changing.
I'm going to come back to that because I want to hook on, but I'm going to come back to you, Steve, after I've come to Panteli. Panteli, my friend, I mean, what's the map like that you, I am interested, you know, in like, if I was to draw a heat map around the world and I was to really understand what's going on, I don't know, in France, you know, are there 20 biotechs or 2,000 biotechs that are doing clinical trials? And if you stratify the SMEs into the mid-farm and large, what would it look like? I mean, what's your sense of the map?
Yeah, I think the map's going to become much more sophisticated and nuanced, isn't it? I think there's going to be, the ecosystem is going to become much more complex. And I think that's where, and hopefully that doesn't mean that we'll see fragmentation. Maybe that's also an opportunity to be thinking about partnerships and leveraging technology and big data, you know, as outlined by, you know, by Steve and Nicola. So I think the map is going to become much more complex. And if we kind of take, you know, a very tangible example of that, we see a real focus and emphasis on rare disease. We see rare disease both in small molecule and in large molecules. So I think, how are we going to develop the processes and have the right expertise and mobilize the right expertise at the right time in the process, to your point about mapping what this process will actually look like. So I think it is going to be much more about attention to detail as we continue to evolve the mapping process, to your point, Tony.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Steve now. So Steve, interesting. I mean, only a few years ago, say, I don't know, maybe it's actually 35 years, 40 years ago, it didn't feel like clinical trials has changed that much. It's still a needle in the arm and a bit of stuff going down it. What's changing, Steve?
Science is changing. I think we're just responding to the, you know, genomics, big data, like Panteli was saying, and COVID has changed things in terms of how we do things. I mean, I was talking to one of our consultant hematologists that we work with at the Christie Hospital in Manchester. 30% of her consultations with patients are actually done with a compliant Zoom. Okay, even when we move away from it and everything's sorted, you know, is she going to want to go back, you know, to meeting patients, all those patients face to face all the time? You know, and importantly is the patient. You know, the amount of video calls that she was doing before the pandemic, 0. So I think that's one of the biggest changes. I think, you know, technology has always been there. The regulators are starting to look at things differently. You know, this is, I think all of those technologies and those potentials have always been there, but it's taken, you know, it's so slow to, you know, we are a bunch of conservatives at the end of the day. You know, we're very conservative and slow in terms of how we do things in pharma in general and biotech. And I think, you know, it's taken such a massive kind of external environmental change like COVID to actually accelerate something that was already happening. I think. I mean, I'd be interested in Panteli and Nicola and everybody else's thoughts on that.
Before we just to ground us a little, give us an example of what is really changing.
I think it's about taking the trial to the patient. Okay, the common thing is we want to recruit a patient. Okay, what we want to do is the patient comes into the office, into the doctor's office, and we find them there. So everything's around supporting the site and the investigator in his ivory tower, in his clinic, you know, a rare disease clinic or an oncology clinic or a GP surgery or whatever. So the whole focus of the industry, CROs and pharma, was all about putting the infrastructure around the investigator. The clinician, the physician was the gateway to accessing patients and there's all those ancillary things like pharmacy and so on and so forth. But that was all about, the site, the number of sites, setting the sites up, whether it be a trust or a GP or whatever. It was all about sites and the best way to work with sites. And COVID has basically just taken that all away, because people don't want to go to sites. The clinicians didn't want people in sites, and we've managed, and that's flipped it. Virtual clinical trials, you can actually take this technology there to take everything to the patient. And I think that's the point, is it's not about a physical building, the old-fashioned ways of doing things. I think that's the biggest example. I'm sorry.
Are drugs being administered at home?
They can be, yes, if they can be posted. But there's even home nurses now. There are nurses that you can take, and they can do an infusion in the patient's home. But there's all of those things about, there are all of those capabilities there, yeah.
Bring in Nicola. I mean, we're not, because I've been doing some projects on data privacy, and, we're not yet talking about taking the physician out, are we?
No.
The physician is still there. So effectively, whether they're in Barts with me or whether they're in in their house in Ilford, I'm still the middleman. Is that true or false?
Yeah, no, that's true. But I think as Steve just said, it's the physical proximity of the middleman in some respects. And I think, of course, this differs, within therapeutic areas. And I think we still have to be mindful of the fact that, there will, depending on what's going on, there will still be a requirement in terms of that physical presentation at sites, depending on what's needed. But I think, and Steve's absolutely right, the technology's been there. We've been doing remote data monitoring for years. I mean, give me a break. There's a lot of this technology, it's been in use, and a lot of, companies have been using it. But, there are, I think, not only has, COVID forced this, real change, but I think it's also helped kind of bring the regulators along as well to enable it and to foster it and to I suppose, almost give it like that stamp of approval that it's needed. But, in talking to people that we know that are, high levels of hospital administration, I asked a very dear friend who's, was trying to run a hospital in the middle of this, last 18 months. And I said, well, how do you feel about not having patients coming in? And he's like, delighted, because they felt that they had the right resources. And again, to Steve's point, there's a burgeoning number of companies out there that are providing these home nursing services, that they're extensions of hospital provision. And it's working really well because they can do all the things that need to be done there and then. And there's no delays in anything, data gets uploaded. I mean, it's exciting times. And like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and we know that. But where it can work, I think what's happening now is that that's immediately coming into the picture so that you can make an assessment. Well, will this work in this study? Yes or no. So I'll shut up then.
But just does that mean monitoring gets removed? Because it's a bit like blockchain. It's a bit like blockchain. It's the same as blockchain, isn't it? You seamlessly transfer data so that there's no so actually monitoring disappears.
It doesn't disappear completely. I suppose that's an interesting one as well, and actually we were just talking to a couple of our sites there about, we really would like to get on site to see things, because, there's been this interesting way of having to take PDFs of different documents and send them, and some are redacted and they're redacted really badly. And anyway, there will still be that need, I think, for being able to go in. Will it be as often? No. But again,
Panteli into the conversation. Thank you, Nicola. Panteli, we've had this discussion times, and I've even been to various presentations that are talking about using cryptocurrency as value measures for individuals' data. It's getting that interesting. But Panteli, what's your thoughts on how things are changing?
I mean, I agree, with the points that Steve and Nicola have made. I think, look, we need to ensure that we continue to have data-driven processes. There's no doubt about that. I think, for me, having spent, nearly 20 years in the NHS, I think the patient-physician relationship is a critical one, isn't it? And, as we'd mentioned, I think drug development is becoming more complex. If I think about cell and gene therapy, where, we're trying to educate and raise awareness, not only about the technology, but making sure that the patient is comfortable with the tools and the information that we're sharing, and having that, that understanding of what that part of their journey is actually going to involve and entail. And it could entail 15 years of long-term follow-up. And I think that goes back to Nicola's point around ensuring that we have very bespoke, white glove patient concierge type services to continue to engage the patient and keep them involved, but continuing to also develop and collect the data that's going to be necessary to inform the process, to your point.
Panteli, can I ask you a question? Is it quite daunting running a clinical trial in today's world? And is it such that normally daunting gets dealt with by money? So in other words, you have to wrap a lot more money around something to be able to fathom it out. Is it quite daunting, and is it going to be more expensive?
It's a great question. Cost implications, come in lots of different shapes and forms. I think it's reflective of the cost of R&D in clinical research. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we've got the necessary framework in place to ensure that patients have options. And a clinical trial is a very viable option for patients. I think the ASCO data was showing that less than 5% of patients with a solid tumor malignancy get into a clinical trial. So we need to make sure that we're offering these options to patients. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on the right key drivers. And cost is going to be a driver, but then let's look at it at the other side, at the other end of the spectrum, as we kind of think about pricing, market access, and reimbursement. And that's another part of the discussion and the debate, certainly in my opinion.
Let's bring Steve into this cost thing and value outcomes, which we did a big event with KPMG on this. Tell us about, Steve, is it harder to cost a study than it was before because there are more moving parts? And in the future, are certain things going to go, like monitoring, but certain things are going to come? So actually, we've got to become a bit less attached to some of our old ways of doing things.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think logically, technology should improve the efficiency of what we do, and certain regulated remote monitoring, all of these things are all focused on improving efficiency, trial efficiency, and the delivery of trials, which should ultimately make them more cost effective. But I think the real challenge is the increasing need to be more flexible in terms of being patient focused. So I think those natural things of remote monitoring and so on, and technology that might improve efficiency, are probably that investment or those cost savings are probably better applied to actually being more innovative and supporting patients in a better way. And there's always this question about quality, cost, and time, isn't there? And it's a really difficult balancing act. So I don't think the cost of trials will go down. I think how trials will be delivered, the speed of trials, and so on and so forth, is likely to improve. I think development times will improve. But I wouldn't have thought that costs, I don't think that the costs of getting a drug to market are necessarily going to go down.
Because Nicola, I'm going to ask you the same, but I sense, and I don't know whether it's just me, but I sense since we've got into the world of biologicals, there's a bit more belief that everything is going to work, which I don't believe, and I've clearly not experienced it. But there's almost this belief that, you got an antibody, it's bound to work, So, I mean, I suppose in the pricing, does that mean that people are happier to pay more money to do a clinical trial because actually it's more of a slam dunk? Nicola?
No. I have to be very honest, I don't think so. And honestly, Tony, I think that's part of our job as CROs, is to remind people that it's still an experiment that they're about to run, you know, and it could be a very costly experiment. And in fact, you know, bringing me to one of my favorite soapboxes, which is about having the right trial design in the first place, so that as soon as they can possibly reach that go, no go, it's working, it's not working. And to invest in the right, you know, approach to that. And that's where cost saving should really come into it. Is that planning and that understanding of what your development plan and your trajectory should look like. And, you know, and again, as a CRO, we've been involved in that. And I think the other folks here who I think have some superb expertise are probably, I'm hoping, I see Panteli nodding, but definitely, to me, that's where the whole cost implication has to really come in to full force. And just on that, the other thing, like I hinted at earlier, you know, we're seeing the costs of research go up and up and up with the sites. Whatever about the CRO cost, the site costs are going up exponentially.
But why, Nicola, is that?
Just the only thing I can venture an opinion on is, you know, the C word is being used as an excuse for lots of different things and trying to claw back some kind of revenue. But I don't know, Tony, it's not fair for me to.
Really, this is I mean, it always was that, you know, the world had various countries that were very good at professional clinical trials and ones which were more amateur. The more amateur tended to not understand the cost of things, and a lot of things were done in the grey matter. Is it that people have become more transparent in the costs? Is it that the whole thing is the dynamics are changing? But I mean, Panteli, I mean, just one question to you as well into all this: how many are we getting, more or less phase 3 failures now?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I think, you know, certainly in hematology oncology, you know, we're seeing, again, different sort of levels of complexity. We see much more segmentation of the patient pathway. You know, I think about when I worked on Velcade, when I was at Janssen, you know, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when, you know, Velcade was being established as the backbone therapy in multiple myeloma. Look at the multiple myeloma landscape now. It's very, very segmented. I think patients have great options, and I think that's fantastic, but it's all about sequencing and combination partners. So I think the drug development paradigm, certainly in hem-onc, which is much more complex, it's not about monotherapy anymore. It's about combining with, you know, with other agents, some of which are going to be very, very expensive from a reimbursement perspective. So is that also impacting what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, but also from a clinical trial, to Nicola's point, the way that we design clinical trials, the way that we identify the right patients, and just that framework that we're building as we engage with sponsors in the space. I think complexity is certainly a key parameter.
I mean, I can't believe time is moving. I can't believe time's moving so quickly, Graham. I just looked at the time because I love this stuff, because I fundamentally, I mean, I always used to give this lecture, and I still would give it, that we used to spend more money on converting data from analog to digital than we did on understanding whether the drug really worked in animals. And I always found that bizarre, because what happens is, in a way, the trust that what you're putting into a clinical trial has to be, you know, you've got to have such a high trust, because your costs are going to go up like mad. But I'm convinced that I'm hearing now that people are putting better things in, but that's for discussion than they used to have. Can I open up the general room for any comments, because otherwise we're going to bang on here, because I think this is really interesting. So let's bring others on. Have we got any other questions in the room? Anyone? Mike, you've normally got something, because Mike has worked for a CRO, and he's currently got his own. He's a CEO of a business that is going to use CROs. So Mike, you're a great person to talk to.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That's very kind of you. Hello, everybody. Hello, Steve. We know each other. Panteli, we've met before. Nicola, we've spoken before. So we're too early for all of you, okay? So don't keep badgering me is the first thing I have to say. But when it comes to, because I do also work part of my time with a clinical CRO and help them. And they're a small CRO, and they very much, as Steve alluded to, do nursing, at-home nursing procedures for particularly oncology patients. And they did a lot of studies and adapted studies, and with some of my help, of course, adapted the studies that were already running for when COVID came in, so that they could keep running and keep happening. And a lot of that changed into a lot of the IT stuff that Steve talked about. You know, the patients use their own cameras to take pictures of what they were taking and what they were doing, and it worked. It did actually work. It just changed things a lot. And yes, I think that will move. Things will move in those sorts of directions. In terms of patients and doctors not wanting to meet, I have to do that from a patient point of view. I hate Zoom patient-doctor interactions. How the hell can a doctor examine my dermal lesion on a camera? You can't, full stop, you can't. You need to put hands on. And that's the same for many different things. And that's why doctors train so hard to be able to diagnose. And a lot, yes, comes from the history.
But Mike, I have to...
I know, I'm not answering your question, Tony. I know I'm not.
No, but I have to challenge you, Mike, because I mean, I'm with you completely. However,
I would love to be challenged. That's fine.
But however, I'm now working with people who they look at what I see as noise, and they make something of noise using some algorithm. And my question is that, and I think this is not nonsense. It looks, you know, you like when you look at any clinical trial data, you think this is a disaster, but people put it through filters and filters. Now the challenge is,
look at the trial master files. Yes.
Yeah. The question to you, Mike, is, you know, is that little photograph, you know, being pixelated at 5,000 billion levels, and somebody's looking at, and actually they can get something pretty good out of it?
Oh, I'm not saying they can't. What I'm saying is the photograph is not the complete examination, because with a dermatological lesion, you need to know what the local lymph nodes are doing. You need to look at other areas of the body. You can't just look at the skin lesion. And, you know, it's just, there will be, but the basics still will be, it has to be, it can't all be one or can't all be the other. It's got to be something. Maybe in certain instances can be all, you know, 90% digital and everything, and patient does it all in their own home and all of that. Of course, yes, there will be trials. So trials are individual for the disease, not necessarily area, but for the disease you're looking into. Certain oncologies can be done one way, other oncology trials are another way, because oncology seems to be the big of everything, of course. But, you know, certain trials can be, but the trials have to be almost individualized and managed for the patients that are going to be the part of that trial, because the patients are what it's all about for those trials.
Yeah, but you could imagine, Mike, you're going to get, you're going to be sitting at home, you're going to be sitting watching the football or something. In's going to come you a pack of drugs. It's going to arrive. You're going to open it up like Amazon, aren't you? You're going to open it up. You're going to have your mobile phone there, which is 5G, and I'm going to take my drug, and then I'm going to 5G a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
And
it works for something.
The doctors nowhere.
Well, I'm all saying it doesn't work for everything. It works for some, doesn't work for others. So you've got to, that's the interaction as I see between the CRO and their client, you know, the sponsor, however you determine it. That's an interaction, and that's why you must work together so that you get the best trial, that's the fastest trial for the sponsor, of course, for the CRO, of course, because it's great kudos, but most importantly for the patient. So that, yes, some patients will love to get that Amazon box and open it up and find out they've got 10,000 pills and they've got to take a pink one at 2 o'clock and a green one at 4 o'clock. But not all patients can do that. And that's why there needs to be almost individualized within a trial.
So my question
ability to do that
to all of you, including Mike and Hilary and everyone who can join in, Manu, Manju, everyone, is, you know, is it possible that, and I don't want to use the word health service or private or public, but is it possible that institutions are taken out completely? Because you don't need the institution traditionally owns the data of the patient, but let's take that out and we imagine that the patient is going to own the data. Actually, you can take all institutions out and you can completely do everything private by putting in your own doctors so that the institution is cut out. Now, Panteli, you're sort of nodding there. Is that possible?
I think so. I think what you're alluding to is, you know, the decentralized clinical trial process. How do we virtualize clinical trials? And I think that that's certainly something that we should be thinking about in terms of the future state. But I think to the point, it's about how do we personalize it? This has to be on a case-by-case basis, and it will be driven by therapeutic area and indication. But I agree with you. Certainly in my perspective, we're always looking at ways to think about, how do I reduce the burden on the site and on the patient? So there are practicalities. So we can go from a very traditional bricks and mortar approach, which I think is important in terms of building that trust between the patient and the physician, but also thinking about it at the other end of the spectrum, you know, fully decentralized. But that's only going to be relevant for specific segments of the clinical development paradigm. So it won't be about continuity. It will be about segmentation.
And
I was just going to say that Manage on the technology front probably has quite some interesting things to say. So just so you know, Tony, to bring him in.
I just want to bring a couple of the others, and then I'm going to bring in Manju. Manage. But I can't see with these glasses.
Okay.
Anyway,
can you not hear with those glasses?
Graham's a great pedantic. He's always getting at my little. Anyway, moving on.
Could I entertain myself somehow? You know.
Graham's.
Only if you can't see with them on, why not take them off?
Well, because I can clearly not see. You're just a blur then.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
You look actually very good, Mike, so don't worry. But moving on, you've completely lost my train of thought. So I want to bring on this because I think that it is very interesting, this idea of fully making everything close to the patient and taking out institutions. I'm going to ask Nicola, is that the way we're going to go? Nicola, I've lost you.
Nicola's frozen, so if you just
Steve,
else.
Steve, well, and then I'm going to ask.
No, I agree with Mike. What we're doing here is using technology to optimize the physician-patient relationship. Okay, at the end of the day, technology and what we do, we are enablers of that decision by a clinician and the relationship that they have with the patient to do the right thing for the patient. Everything that we do is about supporting the doctor-patient relationship. Technology and everything else is all there. Because to Mike's point, at the end of the day, we're human beings, okay? And who do we trust most in all the world in terms of this? It's our doctor, okay? And these guys are trained to do it, and they're trained to make judgments, okay? Technology, AI is brilliant. Humans are crap at prediction. Okay, but we're brilliant at judgment, and clinicians and doctors are trained to make judgments. If we apply technology to help them create predictions so that they can make better judgments for their patients, or make better virtual trials or whatever for their patients, then that is what it's all about. It's about enhancing that relationship. And I don't think you can ever get away from that.
So, but my interest in, I'm going to bring Manju, I'm going to ask Nicola, then I'm going to bring Manoj. I'm going to bring him in. But you know, this idea, right? A patient goes to Barts, and when they go to Barts, they see a doctor in Barts, and Barts puts their data on a database which is owned by the National Health Service, theoretically, but it's also owned by Barts, and it's also owned by the patient, right? Is the future going to be that the patient doesn't come into Barts, he stays at home, or she stays at home, everything goes into the cloud, and then what happens is you send in a private doctor where there's still a doctor-patient relationship, but the whole thing changes. And I'm going to bring in my friend. I'm very apologetic. My eyes can't see your name, but it looks like Manoj, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's theoretically possible, especially if you're looking at keeping the patient-investigator relationship alive. And I don't see regulators doing away with that anytime soon. In fact, the whole resistance to decentralized trials was that what would be the role of the investigator, and who would own the data, and who'd take care of the patient safety and privacy, data privacy. COVID has really helped. COVID has pushed things along so far, and even though a lot of regulators thought that okay, it's a 1 year time period, we can go back to how things were, but things have changed so much that they've actually come along quite far up the path. They're willing to make a lot of concessions, and then everybody's taken up with technology so well, including investigators, patients, people who you would never have thought would take part in clinical trials are doing that now. So one is that the patient-investigator relationship is not going to go away. What you talked about bringing in private investigators is a radical idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody does try it, or if they're already trying it. Okay, except that the patient should be able to trust him, and that's the other point, which is one of the points, is that how does the trust come in with somebody whom you don't know?
I think the data trust is there. There is enough methodologies there to actually protect the individual. I think it's this idea about, do you know the doctor? And I think in clinical trials, not necessarily is there a very strong relationship with the doctor in the center because they're in a clinical trial. But Nicola, what's your thoughts?
Well, actually, we have been in discussions with a company in America that's doing just that. That's the complete decentralized model where they are bringing in virtual patients. They have sourced clinicians, and they're essentially bringing together the whole package. And they're actually doing it for what we thought was an extremely reasonable price, particularly in the American clinical trials market. So it is being done already, Tony.
And this will be hugely disruptive, won't it?
Yeah.
Because this is the big next breakthrough. Because I'm very interested, where will the data go? Panteli. Where will the data go? I mean, it will go into, it's like a safe that people then use cryptocurrency to buy, or am I watching too much sci-fi?
Maybe a little bit too much sci-fi, but I think, when we think about the future state, you're absolutely right. It's how do we collate the data? How do we interpret, consolidate, analyze the data? And as we were saying earlier, as part of the presentation or the discussion, we have to be driven by data processes. So I think, I think you're right. This is certainly an evolving landscape, and we're developing much more sophisticated tools. But I also think about the volume of data now. If I think about cell and gene therapy clinical trials, for example, the volume of data that's been generated in a very small window of time is pretty significant. So again, collecting, interpreting, making treatment decisions very quickly. How is that going to play out in terms of the framework that we're building and talking about today?
Just wanted to add a point.
Sorry, my friend.
Manoj here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at where privacy laws are going, the more and more focus towards individual privacy. So patient data today is thought to be owned by the institution, by the hospital, or by the NHS in the UK, in the case of the UK. But going forward, it's possible that it would be regulated that the data would be owned by the patient.
Yeah.
And then it gets the whole thing changes, right? That's one. The second, in terms of the decentralized trials and bringing in investigators who are not connected to the patient, that's possible in certain cases. We did a study, and especially during COVID, we did a study for 12,000 patients. I mean the investigators were completely unknown to the patients, and this was done completely remotely. So they never met the doctors, right? They consented remotely, and the study got done, right? Of course, it's not possible for a lot of therapeutic areas, but definitely possible for a few.
Can I just throw in one question to everybody, and then anyone who wants to join in, please join in, and then we're going to just do a quick breakout room. In days gone by, innovation tended to be done by pharma. So they were at the front edge, the big companies were at the front edge of the way the future is going to transpire. They were doing the investments. I mean, are the CROs in the slipstream of what big pharma has as a vision for the clinical trial of the future, or are the CROs actually contributing in a big way to that? I asked Panteli that first.
I think the CROs have an important part to play, in that construct. To be honest, I mean, at PPD, for example, where one of our strategic areas of focus is digital. So I think we do need to be, at the cutting edge. That requires, of course, investment as capabilities refined and repurposed to a certain extent. But I think it also goes back to one of the fundamental points that you raised at the beginning of the discussion, Tony, around the perception of the CRO. And in my opinion, and I've been on the other side of the fence as well, but the CRO is a clinical development partner. And from my perspective, that is the construct and framework that we need to be building on. The shared accountability, we want to be part of the ecosystem in that particular regard. So I think, we will continue to contribute to technology, innovation, and the clinical development paradigm, as we've been discussing.
Interesting. I'm going to open the questions to anybody now. Anybody got any questions to our friends who are with us?
Yeah, I've got a quick, but it's not so much a question as more of a comment, because we had the meeting yesterday on preclinical CROs and then today on clinical CROs. And in some respects, there's very little difference in the sense that we keep using the word partner and trust. So it doesn't really matter whether it's an early stage experiment or a clinical experiment. It's, you're going to work with the people that you trust. And also, I think, within the clinical space, it's very much dependent on the therapeutic area. Tony, you've been talking as if, going to decentralized trials is something new and something post-COVID. I remember back in the early 2000s, long discussions about depression trials and the fact that you get a huge placebo effect because you take an interest in the patient by having them in to see the doctor, talking to them, etc.
We can't have that.
You get a placebo effect. So what we were then talking about was doing a naturalistic study, which meant you went to see the doctor for 10 minutes, you were given either your blue pill or your pink pill, then told to go home for 6 weeks, and then were phoned up to ask if you felt any better, because that was how the drug was going to be used in the real world.
The difference really is, I think, Nick, that if you remove the middleman, which is the institution, So no longer, you know, it would always be around King's or Bart's, or, you know, if you remove all those institutions and you can go direct to Bermondsey flat number 13, that really changes the game.
Yeah, but I don't think it's something that's necessarily as new as you think.
That's probably, Nick, something that can occur in clinical that probably is a big change that probably can't happen in preclinical.
The problem with that, Tony, there's a slight issue with that, particularly here in the UK, in that the NHS is not digitized.
Yeah.
And it relies a lot of the time on scribbled notes on pieces of paper. Still, they've been trying to digitize the NHS. This is just the UK, well, certainly England anyway. They've been trying to digitize the NHS for a long time and have failed repeatedly because one trust won't agree to another trust making the decision on something that affects both of them. It's politics.
But it also means that we won't do any clinical trials.
And it means that those data that should be in the cloud that you could access if you went to flat 37A, blah, 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 to get the patient to do the trial, those data aren't there. They can't be accessed.
So, Manoj, you got a point?
Yeah, so when you're actually talking about removing the middleman, you're basically saying that a lot of that responsibility would go to the clinical trial partner, the CRO.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I don't know, Tony, if you want to round things up. I mean, I don't think we'll break into groups, but I think we'll take off the record. Okay. Yes, so
my round before we take off the record was thank you so much to our three lovely people who have turned up to help us. And I mean, I like yesterday, I found this discussion fantastic. And we will be using the video to get it out to the masses who have missed a bit of a treat here. And, you know, we'd like to continue this journey and get you back for another session, maybe in one of our other events. But thank you so much. And, you know, if there's not many of us to clap, but I'm going to clap for you because I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to meeting you all individually and having a drink with you when we eventually get out. Can you imagine?
Sooner rather than later.
Can you imagine? It'll just be so good. Can you I'll be hugging Panteli and,
I think we got to keep you on Zoom, Tony, and the rest of us.
Do you mean you can't do virtual beers? Come on, we're in the world of virtual drinking, aren't we?
It's a bit depressing, though.
Steve, I can't hug you, man, which is what I would do naturally, and you would love it. But on that note, have you taken the recording off? I mean, maybe we should just do a quick couple of rooms and then call it a day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we got the recording off. I mean,